Of Vanishing Gradients. I'm Hugo Bowne-Anderson. This is Vanishing Gradients, the data science, ML, AI podcast. Super excited to be here today with Joe Reis. What is up, Joe?
How you doing?
I'm well. Yourself?
Doing good. Doing good. Just second podcast of the day. Trying to write in between. That's about it. Normal
Very
day.
cool.
Watching
Very
a sick
cool.
kid right now, so it's pretty.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, man.
It
There's
happens,
something going
man.
around here as well. I think it's summer. So I'm in Sydney, Australia, everyone. It's 7 a.m. Friday. And I can tell you, everyone who's on Thursday time, Friday is a beautiful day. It's coming for you. Joe, you're in
Utah. Yeah.
SLC? Or
Yeah, SLC.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Anyone joining, please let us know where you're joining from and what your interest in such things are. Do you work in data science or AI? You work in software? And if you enjoy these types of things, please the obligatory like and subscribe, share with friends. If you don't like it, no need to tell anyone that. Just don't engage, right? It's the internet.
But the internet means that they're gonna criticize you and yeah,
exactly.
that's what it is.
Exactly. So. The host talks too much. Deal with it. I talk a lot. Joe, thanks so much for joining me. We're living in an interesting time of, polarization along some axes and mediocrity among many others. We're here to talk about vibe coding and the Great Pacific garbage patch of code slop. You've called vibe coding an anti-pattern, a joke, a part of the Great Pacific garbage patch of code slop.
Among other things, yeah.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? What's the vibe?
I mean, it's just vibes, right? So, I mean, let's go through this. So, I think let's define for people what vibe coding is first, and I think that's kind of paraphrasing from Andre's
it might be
tweet
worthwhile
here.
reading out his original.
Yeah,
tweet.
let me just read it. I mean, it's a tweet, right? Or an X. No, I'm not even on X. I got dropped that shit. So, I can cuss on your show, right? No? Okay, I'll try not to. Okay, so Andre writes, there's a new kind of coding called vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. It's possible because the LLMs, e.g. Cursor, Composer with Sonnet, are getting too good. And I just talked to Composer with Super Whisperer, so I barely even touched the keyboard. I asked for the dumbest things like decrease the padding on the sidebar by half because I'm too lazy to find it. I also accept all anyways. I accept all anyways. I don't read the diffs anymore. When I get error messages, I just copy and paste them in with no comment. Usually that fixes it. The code grows beyond my usual comprehension. I have to usually really read through it for a while. And sometimes the LLMs can't fix a bug, so I just work around it or ask for some random changes until it goes away. It's not too bad for throwaway weekend projects, but still quite amusing. I'm building a project or web app, but it's not really coding. I just say stuff, run around and copy paste stuff, and it mostly works. So I think that encapsulates maybe what vibe coding is, at least according to Andre, and how people are using it. So I want to distinguish that because you brought up a good post by article by Simon Willison, where he sort of dives into the nuance of vibe coding. So I think what this really means is sort of the I think overly promiscuous use of code gen tools to generate code, quote, build stuff without putting much thought into it, just going off of vibes. Is that how you read this?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think it'll be worth exploring at some point in this conversation the spectrum of using AI assistants from
absolutely
code completion to embracing exponentials, and also the type of software that it allows us to create. Because I think we're in a space where on one end we have grifters who are like, SaaS is dead and we're going to fucking kill Salesforce by vibe coding. That's clearly bullshit. On the other side, we have, as you would put it, old men shouting at clouds. So I'd love to explore the fertile ground, but perhaps give us your take on kind of what the space looks like at the moment, maybe on LinkedIn as well, where we've had these conversations.
Yeah. So it was one of those things where initially when we were talking about vibe coding, I almost didn't want to do this talk because I'm like, I can't believe we're actually going to have a serious conversation about it. But then I was like, okay, it's the zeitgeist of at least the week until we find something else to get upset about. But I think it more highlights an issue that I've seen with skills as it pertains to code gen, right? I think vibe coding is sort of an extreme of this, where you're just sort of abdicating all of your quote skill or your lack of skill to AI. But if we take a step back, I mean, this is nothing new. I think it was Aristotle or somebody who was complaining about writing way back in the day, and that would remove the need for humans to remember things and think. So we've been here before, and people criticize the printing press for much the same reason, that it would mean that writing is too democratized, and I think there were some political reasons for those comments too. So history's not, it can be unkind, I would say, to new innovation. So I'll get that out of the way. But why do I say the things I do about vibe coding?
And what do you say?
What do I say? I think to its fullest extent, it's an anti-pattern if you're going to take it seriously and use it in everyday use. I have no problem if you're vibe coding to toy around with an app. Like, we all do that. We're all dorks. So, and I think we
and we've done that historically, right? We just haven't used LLMs, right? Like, no. I've vibe coded shit by Googling constantly, like, to
all
try
the time
to figure out how to build a React something where I don't care. Like, I don't want to learn React.
That's just it. I mean, we've all done that, right? So, but I think to take it to an extreme now, the comments that I keep hearing are, we're sort of in this new age where anyone can build apps. And so, and people pointing out examples like, yeah, my hairdresser, she didn't even know how to make an iOS app, and she made a great app. And I'm like, that's great. But let's distinguish between like things that are apps and projects versus things that go into production that are mission critical systems. And I think this is where I'm starting to see the conversation sort of get lost, as we can just vibe code seemingly anything, even in production. Like, I've had serious conversations with people. They're like, yeah, we'll just vibe code. I'm like, are you like, you aren't even worthy of calling yourself anything remotely close to an engineer if you're going to do that in production, right? I think that's where I got a bit peeve the other day about it. So but it is definitely a spectrum, but I would say it's got its time and place. I think we all like to quote vibe code with AI these days. I mean, I do my fair share of it on the side, but it's always for toys, right? And it's for usually use cases where I maybe I'm not totally familiar with that language or platform or whatever, and it definitely has an assist. But the thing is, people like you and I know how to write code, so sort of what you're looking for, like, and you know what anti-patterns are when you see them, right? So there's this old term called code smells. If you're familiar with that, I mean, it came out a long time ago, but that's one of the things where you can kind of smell pretty bad code. So I think that's the big difference.
Totally. So. And I like the distinction between doing stuff for production use and serving users with security, all authentication, all of these things. But I probably would push back slightly on not having it for everyday use. And I'm thinking of an example, and this is one I did a live stream yesterday where we chatted about examples like this, but several people recently have told me they'll like spin up bespoke JSON viewers because there isn't one that's really built that is good for their use case. Now, when they do that, they want to do some queries on them, that type of stuff. They'll then write a few tests to make sure that they're getting what they expect. So they're not necessarily exploring all the code, but they're writing a few tests around it. Why that's interesting to me is because I don't come from the software side, right? I come from the data and machine learning and science side. My background's in biology and physics, right? So I do this type of exploration and experimentation all the time. So having tools that I can spin up and spin down in order to serve my ephemeral purposes, I think is incredibly useful. So I'd love your take just on just how, once again, not to productionize. Of course, if it's something cool that then we want to productionize because it may help external people, then I start to explore that. But I suppose I want your take on just the increased surface area of what type of software is possible now. And I want to frame it a bit historically, that one of the reasons we require software, as we know, is incredibly complex to engineer, to build, to make scalable and robust. And it has to handle a lot of edge cases due to the economics of it. Because you have so many software engineers and so much investment in it, you need to serve a lot of people and get significant investment. If I can spin something up myself for my own use, I don't have to do that investment. I don't have to worry about edge cases. So I suppose it's empowering to consider the surface area increase in software development and the surface area of who can do it as well, right?
It is. I would say with the caveat that you know what you're doing, right? This is the central question, right? And this is a central topic where, as Travis Smith points out in the comments, you have to have the foundational knowledge first, whether it's software or data programming. That's absolutely true. Without that, like, you can go ahead and spin up the biggest, most complicated system that covers all the edge cases possible. But the question is, how would you know that one, you've built something that serves the needs of hopefully your users or the systems that you're building for. And second, how would you even know what an edge case looks like? Right. I mean, it's
exactly. And to my point, as a data like science nerd, I know what the edge cases will look like for the data stuff, but maybe not all the ins and outs of the software I'm building. So, and we do that in data science and machine learning all the time. I mean, we deploy things, roll them out slowly, deploy them internally, then we see how they're operating in production, look at monitor drift, these types of things, and then recalibrate then. So I suppose when building AI-powered apps, there's a kind of, it just feels a bit similar to me as what I've been doing for a long time. Whereas I think I presume you're a far better software engineer than I am, because I've learned.
I've never seen you software engineer. But the thing is, it's like, I mean, there's more to it than just writing code, though, right? It's how you think about system design and architecture and all that, and that just requires, I think, just like cycles of just knowing what works and what doesn't.
I love this so much.
You can't
because. Sorry, please.
Oh no! What I'm saying though is like what you mentioned with data scientists. That's the entire reason why ML engineering and ML ops got into the picture, is because most data scientists. I mean, you're good at, I think, using code to describe data problems and and solve those, but the production aspect that you described, that's the entire reason there's a whole ecosystem of tooling and support out there. Because I mean, to be fair, a lot of data scientists, I know they can write code, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to write code, if you know what I mean. So but that's not a knock against you using code to leverage your skills in certain areas. Like last night I was at a meetup in Salt Lake City, and the presenter was talking about was it PGML, so Postgres ML extension, and it's pretty dope. I don't really have a use for it, but you're able to do XGBoost and sklearn and Postgres, right? But to use, I mean, it makes it simpler to use, but you still got to understand what you're doing, I suppose. So it's
without a doubt.
Yeah. So I guess that's the whole point with vibe coding, right? I think because what I think the discussions I'm hearing more broadly is just like, we're going to have this new era of software where anyone can write code. Anyone can write code. That's just it. Or anything can write code these days. That's the whole point. But just because you can, does it mean that, well, I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't do. Go for it, right? But I would say the old expression is, fuck around, find out, and that's kind of what you're going to be dealing with. Like every engineer that I know who's been in the game for a bit is excited about this moment of vibe coding. We're so excited because the amount of technical debt that's about to be unleashed on the world is, it's like, so I equate it to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, right? And so for context, the reason I think about it in this framework is, if you go back to how things were crafted back in the day, there was a sense of quality, there was a sense of craftsmanship, there was a sense of pride in one's work, right? And I think as we became, much more of a commercial society, where things, started making everything out of cheap plastics, and everything was disposable, right? And that there's no free lunch here. Things go, when you throw things away, sometimes they end up, I don't know, in a landfill, sometimes they end up in the ocean, right? And so the Pacific Garbage Patch is like, was it, I don't know, 1.6 million square kilometers, something like that, 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic and counting. 99% of it is plastic. And I think to me that represents just sort of the consequence of this disposable culture that we're in, where we can just throw things out sight unseen. You don't see the garbage patch. But it's ironic because as we adopt these practices like Agile and DevOps and XOps, whatever, these take their inspiration from Lean. And the whole idea of Lean is actually reduce errors and defects and produce things of high quality in a repeatable, fast way. And this has been lost, I think, in the industry. Like we think that we're being agile because we can pump out more code. Whether or not the code adds any value or not, or whether or not it's actually, going to produce more debt down the road, this is besides the point. Nobody seems to care about this. It's how many lines of codes you ship. And so I think this is the danger we're in now, where you can the marginal cost of producing code is essentially zero at this point. Just like when the internet ushered in content, every newspaper in the universe just died, pretty much. Slow death, but it's not relevant because the cost of distributing content is zero now. and the same thing is going to happen with code. And so, but obviously the side effect of this is, the great Pacific garbage patch of slopware, I suppose, is slopware was actually coined in Urban Dictionary in 2005, but it means much the same thing. So,
awesome.
But yeah, and then somebody's mentioning security here, and this is something I'm talking to security people about too. Sorry to cut you off, but like security is a big thing where everyone's like, this is like the big thing. Like the consequence of getting a code wrong and it blowing up, I mean, that depends on what it's used for. The consequence of security errors, far greater, right? Most people don't understand security to begin with. Now you take an untrained person trying to do hacky software and put that in quote production. It's going to be a pretty exciting time. So.
Definitely. I mean, across a lot of dimensions, in a lot of directions. There are several things in the chat I want to get to.
There's a lot of good questions, good comments.
Ryan,
yeah,
but there is something I want to mention first. I do like how you framed it in terms of around programming, building software isn't just about writing code. It's about designing systems, and I do think there's a big opportunity here for us to actually, this has revealed kind of what the job really is. And I've posted in the chat a wonderful essay by Tim O'Reilly called The End of Programming as We Know It, which you and I actually corresponded about when it first came out. But he actually mentions an email from our mutual friend Chip Huynh, the author of AI Engineering Among Just Being Legend. And Chip wrote to Tim and said, I don't think AI introduces a new kind of thinking. It reveals what actually requires thinking. No matter how manual, if a task can only be done by a handful of those most educated, that task is considered intellectual. One example is writing, the physical act of copying words onto paper. In the past, when only a small portion of the population was literate, writing was considered intellectual. People even took pride in their calligraphy. Nowadays, the word writing no longer refers to this physical act, but the higher abstraction of arranging ideas into a readable format. Similarly, once the physical act of coding can be automated, the meaning of programming will change to refer to the act of arranging ideas into executable programs. So I wonder from your perspective, how AI assistants can play into this, and if at least initially prototyping with vibe coding can actually help us with this new paradigm of how we think about building software.
I mean, it's interesting because I'm using, a few LLMs right now to help with my own thinking about writing my book. Right. And so what I think it's uncovering for me is all the blind spots that I have. And what it's uncovering for me is all the blind spots of my friends. So, with my book, I'm in a fortunate position where if I have a question, I can go ask probably the world's top expert and have them review what I wrote.
Yeah.
That's great. And they have a lot of context. I say what the challenge of that is, I'm noticing that LLMs are catching things that even top experts are missing sometimes in conversations. And so that's because it's been trained on the entire internet. So it sees maybe some nuance that even experts, and obviously experts know a lot of things that LLMs don't. So I think it's definitely complementary. Like I'm using it to push my thinking forward in a lot of topics. I was on a plane back from Europe last week, and I was just chatting with Claude for hours about actually vibe coding and just the issues of it. This is before our conversation, actually. So I was asking Claude, what's the consequence if everything is basically, if all data, in the systems and code or just all generated by AI. So I'm thinking about the logical extension of where companies are saying that 99% of code is going to be written by AI and agents and so forth. And I'm like, okay, so at the biggest extreme here, what does this look like, and what are the consequences of this? Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And Claude has brought up a lot of good points either way. It's like it could be good. Here's the downsides, probably enormous amounts of technical debt, but then the counter argument as well, but would an AI just like catch the technical debt and fix it? So it's revealing a lot of questions, I think, to Chip's point, under the underlying ways we think about things, but also I think we've lived in a world of serious constraints, mainly labor constraints in terms of the amount of code that we can generate and things that we can build. But I don't think we're anywhere near there yet. And so, and just the amount of, and if you talk about enterprises, for example, it's like just the sheer amount of complexity in any enterprise code base is insane. Like it's not fathomable even by probably a single person, right? So maybe AI does it. I don't know, but I think that they're not there.
To a meta point you made earlier, currently the way we work and the incentive systems are kind of screwed. I'm going to paraphrase, but you spoke about wanting people to take pride in their work, and that I have paraphrased that, but we do live in a kind of a skewed system where a lot of people are forced to do jobs that they're not able to necessarily take pride in, and do tasks that don't serve them as individuals in corporate structures. I don't want to get too like I'm not a punch card, but there is that vibe. The other thing is there are incentives, particularly in software, or at least ML and AI, to build and not maintain, right?
Oh yeah.
So that the amount of technical debt, spaghetti code out there, and essentially unmaintainable systems and castles of sand is super concerning. Brian Bischoff had a really good point, which is the original tweet from Karpathy specified side projects, so it's not clear to him that this isn't all a straw man. And I suppose I would say I agree with that take from Karpathy's tweet, but I think what's been exposed now is that, of course, like all the people saying we can build SaaS by vibe coding, that's nonsense. I do think there is some middle ground, and that's why I brought up the example of like bespoke JSON viewers and that type of stuff, and run some tests yourself. So I do wonder what else it allows us to do. And William Horton in the chat spoke to this. He said he thinks production might be ill-defined, and I actually agree with that. I mean, for me, working in ML, productionization is a huge. There's a graded approach to it where maybe you deploy, then scale, then have more reliability, then do online experimentation, then horizontal scaling, whatever it is. And so he gave the example that he vibe coded a chess training tool that's deployed on the internet, used by a few of his friends. So he doesn't know why that wouldn't be production or partial production. It's a real live app on the web with users. It doesn't necessarily have security, authentication, all of these types of things. But I suppose what we're exposing now is just kind of new ideas of what productionized software can be, and it can have more characteristics, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose, I would define production as anything that's being used by an end user. So congrats on writing a production grade app with vibe coding. But you also got to assess it on the spectrum of risk. So what's the risk for a chess app? Who cares? They could put it on, probably this Raspberry Pi and hook it up, and nobody will really care either way. Right. So I think you got to assess like what's the risk profile. But and Brian's comment about Andre's saying this for projects is correct. That's why we read it, the tweet before we started, so we could establish exactly what this is. So I mean, those are all fair points here. The interesting thing is, again, it's what usually happens with these kinds of things, and what I see happening with vibe coding. Because what was it? Tweet was from February 25th, so we're not even a month into it. But things get distorted, right? Because it's sort of the game of telephone. After about the third call or whatever, not that people use calls anymore, but it's every bit of information's handed down, and pretty soon people are saying, "Oh yeah, like we should totally do this in production for our jobs." And these are serious conversations that I've had with people. Where it's like, "Well, why couldn't I just do this for my job, actually?"
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I guess you should try it. Go for it
and see what happens. So I've pulled up and pasted in the chat a recent blog post from 2 days ago by Simon Willison. Actually, I just posted on Twitter that we were going live, and he was like, "Hey, what does Joe think of this?" And so
wait,
in this post,
who asked that?
Simon Willison. So
that's
Simon
what I think about it. Weird.
Does Joe consider all forms of AI assisted programming to be vibe coding?
No, I don't think so. I think it's how Andre defined it, right? So I don't think that I'm not going to distort what Andre put out there. I mean, he at least coined the current manifestation of this term, so I'm not going to distort it for my own gain. I mean, it's what. No, I don't think so. I mean, I agree very much with what Simon said. Simon says, there's definitely a spectrum of it. I mean, I use AI coding all the time for stuff. I think that it's and on the weekend I also used it, and I found myself having to correct like 90% of its output. So I was like, and at the end of the day, I just did it by hand because I knew what I was going for. But that's in Python, right? I can write Python, like pretty much like blackout drunk at this point. Like it doesn't matter. I've been doing it for so long. It's like or SQL. It's the other one, right? Like it would be really hard to throw a SQL problem at me that I probably couldn't figure out. but that's because but I also know, like, when it was giving me output for Python, I was like, this isn't correct, nor would it meet, standards, right? Like, it's giving me, like, in this case, I had to spin something up. It's like, here's the Postgres connection credentials just in, like, the code and not in, like, a secrets file. And it's like, okay, I'll just do this myself. Thank you very much. So it's, but it was interesting. So, I gave this talk in Austria about almost 2 weeks ago now. It was a very much improvised talk, and it was where I started formulating this idea of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, where it's, even without the notion of vibe coding, that aside, what I see happening right now is, I think this unencumbered use of AI code gen tools and data gen tools and tools where you could, I see some vendors have tools where you can spin up data pipelines and data infrastructure with an LLM now. All great on the surface, right? Why wouldn't we want to do that? It makes life a lot easier. But what I sense is going to happen as these tools proliferate is, like, just the sheer amount of, like you said, just cruft and things out there that are, running in, like, I guess, pseudo production. People rely on them, but they're creaky, not maintainable. And the thing is, because, and you can already see studies in this, like, people's cognitive abilities are going down. This is way before AI, but, like, our ability to critically think through problems is declining. There's countless studies on this right now.
I'm concerned about our ability to read maps. Like, we can read local maps,
yeah,
but now thinking more distributedly, our map minds are shrinking.
It is, yeah. But what the consequence of this, though, is if you fast forward what the industry looks like in 10 years, is there a sense of craftsmanship at all? Does anyone know what the hell they're doing? Or are they all just like these old-time COBOL programmers who are, about retirement age and have to be dusted off for $500,000 a year just to go, fix some creaky code that nobody understands, right? Because the assumption is, well, AI will just do all the stuff for us in 10 years. I think that's because AGI will be here, right? These are legitimate things that I hear serious people say.
I do as well.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That definitely isn't my take. I personally, I don't even think AGI is well defined. I think we probably can, like, give some dimensions, and that's why I find the ARC AGI stuff relatively interesting. But I think the term AGI is a misnomer. There's a religiosity about it as well. It's let's recreate ourselves. Let's be gods, right? And fly to fucking Mars and upload my consciousness to, like, AWS.
I mean, these are all the things I grew up on as a teenager, right? I think I'm a bit older than you. I grew up on all the cyberpunk novels of the 80s, and I used to read. I grew up on Kurzweil too. And it was like I just grew up with this notion that your mind would be uploaded to the some internet at some point or something. But I don't know that I want that anymore. Somebody brought up an interesting question though. Like, can you drive anywhere without using a navigator? I think that's one of the this sort of, I think, drives home one of the points that we're talking about. Do you think you could drive? You think you can navigate without a GPS?
Dude, I did something really dumb a few years ago. I got a dumb phone. I was so addicted to my smartphone. I got a dumb phone and used it for 6 months. It was brutal, man. Like, it ruined my social life. I was single at the time and trying to date. It was like one of the most intense periods of my life. But it made me retrain myself. And this is actually interesting. What I'm about to say, I find interesting. Road signs are actually pretty good, to be honest, at least in Australia where I am. And there's my ability to drive, but also, if we all use GPS enough, maybe counties and cities aren't incentivized to keep up public signage as well. So what does that mean in terms of, like, the infrastructure we have, right?
I have a good example of this. I was in Costa Rica in January, and they don't, as far as I can tell, they don't even have, like, road signs. Everyone uses Waze. Not even Google Maps. I don't know. I tried that, and it wasn't as good as Waze. But everything is sort of just lines on an app. Like, if you don't have Waze, you're going to get very, very lost there.
It's interesting that it's Waze as well. And I think about that in Sydney because I moved back to Australia during COVID from New York, where Seamless is used a lot for food delivery, right? Moved back to Sydney and it was all Uber Eats. And I'd never been in a city where Uber Eats was the major. And I think, you get somewhere, you harness or exploit network effects, and suddenly race to the bottom as well. Is what we're seeing.
It's interesting, yeah. But I mean, I grew up in an era, I grew up in the mountains in Wyoming, so I mean, I can use a compass and a topo map just fine, right? But that's like, if you showed that to most people these days and just said, go, go on a hike. You get these tools. You don't get your phone. Good luck. I mean,
I remember growing up.
be hard.
I remember we had it's the Gregories. It's the phone. It's like the it's the map in the book, right? Whatever the drive in the car. And I remember Mum used to direct Dad all the time, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was like 5 or 6, I was like, am I allowed to give Dad directions now? And I was like, that was super exciting, right? I do want to just go back to Simon's post, and I apologize for everyone who wanted a bit more spice. Joe and I agree on most things, as is quite
wrong.
common,
Wrong. I'm just kidding. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Go back to Simon's post, but I think it's one of those things where it's funny because the conversation that Hugo and I were having via text, I think, was a lot more heated, in the sense where I think a lot of things just come across differently with no verbal cues or context. I can also come across as a bit rough on text, so I do apologize. But it brought us here today, so it's fun.
It did, and look, it brought us together. I do want to say, because I think these are points we've circled around, but from Simon's post explicitly, when he thinks it's okay to vibe code, projects should be low stakes. Okay, think about how much harm the code can do. Right. Consider security. Watch out for secrets. Think about data privacy. Be a good network citizen. Then, a very important one that I think we haven't talked about yet, is your money on the line. If you're trying to build LLM stuff and you're pinging OpenAI, guaranteed your LLM assistant, if it's allowed to execute arbitrary code, you're in YOLO mode, will fucking, you got to put caps on that stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, or you're going to get capped.
You'll get caned. You'll get caned. But
I do,
yeah. I suppose, are there any other, because we've had so much interesting conversation in the chat. Actually, I'm interested. If you were the BDFL, so benevolent dictator for life, king of software engineering practices around the world, what are 3 rules you'd set for how software engineers use AI tools now?
It's an interesting question, because as you're saying that, I was thinking about getting a driver's license and knowing the rules of the road, right? But then I'm thinking about self-driving cars, and well, you don't need to know any rules of the road. I guess it's already been programmed in, right? But you'd still need to, I guess, have an idea of do you know where you're going if you get a self-driving car?
Yeah.
So
and how do you handle failure modes? Maybe with a self-driving car, you actually do need someone who has a license to take over in the 1% of cases, or 1 in 10 to the minus 5% of cases, that it could actually kill someone or people, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I would say at least understand what you're doing. I mean, and this is something I've been talking about a lot for years, really, but I don't think we have any shortage of great tools at this point, great technologies. There's maybe too many, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed.
But our ability to use those tools to the fullest potential, I think, lives and dies by our ability to understand how to use them to their fullest potential. And right now, I'd give the industry, whether it's software, data, machine learning, I'd probably give us about a D in that area. I mean, having run a consulting company, I always joke that I should just be quiet about this, because that's what you pay me to go fix. And for a consultant like yourself, maybe it's there's a lot of money to be made by fixing the mistakes of others. But I truly believe that still it's a knowledge gap problem at the end of the day, and it's only going to get worse, actually, not better. But so I'd say that if I were a benevolent dictator, I would just make sure that there's a standard body of knowledge that anyone who wants to call themselves a professional in this industry has to learn, I would say, in their respective crafts. So that's the one thing I would do. Then from there, feel free to make your own mistakes as you see fit. But until you have that body of knowledge and the skills, how would you know? How would you know that anything works? And I think the other part of it is map this back to what the businesses need, right? And I think more than ever, if you don't know what you're building and you don't even know what the business needs, this is a recipe for disaster. huge disaster. But this is exactly what's going to happen. And of course, every CEO in the world is saying, "Oh, we need to replace all of our workers with AI right now." Not even including software, just everybody at this point. So we're in a very interesting time where I think that so what was interesting. Axios had an interesting article covering a survey that was done by Writer AI on just the disconnect between what C-levels think about their AI capabilities and progress so far versus what employees think about it. It's fascinating. I should find this and put it in the chat here. But it was, it's enterprise AI attention workers, execs, and stuff. But this is fascinating to read through. Essentially, what's happening is it's the C-suite, probably for reasons that they want to look like they're accomplishing a lot of stuff with AI. Say, well, we're accomplishing a lot of great stuff with AI, right? But then you talk to the workers, and like, no way in hell, or we're not even close. The data sucks. Systems are creaky. Nowhere near doing AI. So that's the tension right now. Or employees actively undermining AI initiatives because, well, I don't know. I think somebody called it. What was the quote here? You are. What was it? Just to hear. Asking a turkey to vote for Thanksgiving. It's like asking employees to embrace AI. Yeah. So it's an interesting study, and I urge everyone to look at it. But this is sort of the crux we're in right now, where there's a lot of pressure.
At some point,
I did. I put it in the chat for the in the YouTube.
Great.
It's interesting. This is where we are, right? I mean, there's not an executive in the world who's not. And again, I talk to people who are outside of tech, by the way. I do try and live outside of our bubble, but like white collar workers across the world, knowledge workers, they're getting pressured to embrace AI. My wife had this happen to her at her job, where the boss pulled her aside and said, "Hey, can you help us understand where we can put AI into all of our processes?" And she's like, "Oh, I see where this is going."
This is the first time after our quote unquote ChatGPT moment that I've had like family and friends reach out to me, and people I chat with all the time, but people actually reach out to me about work, like people working in marketing or lawyer cousins and that type of stuff, being like, "Hey, yo, what's happening?" Actually, some of my really sharp teacher friends like pinging me about it all the time as well. I want to go back to the.
What are they talking about? What are the questions they ask you?
On the legal side, they're very interested in what can be automated and what can't, and how trustworthy tools can be, on one side. On the other side, they're asking about regulation. So I've got some family members actually who are, pretty high up in the legal system here, and they're actually on councils and committees to figure out how to regulate AI. And so,
interesting.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court here, I actually don't know how much I can say, but someone here, definitely not the Supreme Court. They've been trying to pass some certain things which will mean that in certain legal situations, no AI can be used. And I was like, well, that seems quite. We need to define certain things, because if I send an email, right, or if I'm using Grammarly to correct stuff, is that using AI if it's AI powered and these types of things? So I think having a more nuanced idea. But to your point, there are so many tools, so much software, and the movement's so quick that it's actually incredibly tough. The teachers are at schools where use of AI is being banned, and students are submitting stuff that's clearly, if not generated by AI, has a bunch of AI in it. And of course, you and I know that AI can be incredible for ideation and then filtering as well. I think the combinatorial explosion of ideation is one thing, but not enough people use it for then crafting and honing. And
they're not incentivized to. It's like, give me a term paper. It's like, fine, I'll give you a term paper. Don't worry about it.
That's the other thing. As I said to my teacher friends, I was like, yo, this is exposing a huge problem with the system that why are we even asking students to write essays? What's their incentive? Their incentive from fucking middle school to the end of high school is to get the best grade possible. I don't know what a GPA or whatever it is there, or maybe that's college, I don't know. But then it is college actually. Then after that, so they're incentivized to get the highest mark possible, not incentivized to learn, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's interesting. My sister's a lawyer, so I asked her about how she's using LLMs there, and it definitely helps with some things. I think speeding up doc creation and stuff like that, or potentially researching, but still a lot of errors with it. But then I was thinking, like, what are the similarities and what are the differences? If you were to replace vibe coding with vibe accounting or vibe legal work, like what would that look like? Right? Or vibe anything else that's not coding. What are the similarities and differences here? That's something I've been thinking a lot about this week, is like, what are the boundaries? Where if you were to say, let's just vibe out, and so I think part of it is a creative pursuit, right? And that's a big distinction, where vibe writing is probably something that's interesting. Can't copyright any of it, by the way. Versus maybe vibe lawyering. And so let's just think of an interesting case here. I guess there's maybe some utility to that. I don't know.
And people are doing it, but I think the good lawyers are humans in the loop, and they're able to then, like, it supercharges them. I think we got lots of 10x lawyers these days, Joe.
10x lawyers.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, 10x. Are ambulance chasers a thing in Australia?
Not as much, because we don't have the I'll sue them vibe that America
I guess that's maybe an American thing. Like, kind of like a Better Call Saul.
Exactly. The 47th and 45th president of the US, who whenever it's like someone said this about you, I'll sue him. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to degrade the quality of the conversation by bringing up old mate. But actually, when I lived in New York, one of my favorite Subway ads was for a divorce lawyer, and it said the phone number was 1-800-DIVORCE, and the tagline was, "For when diamonds aren't forever."
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. It's actually my other favorite of recent times marketing campaign is the city of San Francisco with Alcatraz. They decided to do a marketing campaign a few years ago, "Escape to Alcatraz," to get tourists there, which is wonderful. I am also, it's something we've been talking to, like, lawyers I know who can use these tools. It can use it to do the types of things that usually have paralegals or interns or students help with, or junior assistants. One thing I'm actually very concerned about is what career paths this carves out. And I think we're seeing it in engineering as well, and data science. We've already had an issue with entry-level positions in data science and ML from the get-go. But now, how are we even going to learn things if all the people who've learned things are building, and they don't really need to employ people to help them to establish careers? So what happens to entry-level positions now?
That's the big question right now. It's a big question. I think everyone in the world, I don't have an answer. I don't think anyone knows just yet what happens, right? There's a lot of factors at play. It's a competitive job market as it is, even if you're senior right now.
Yeah.
If you're senior, mid-level senior, even whatever, it's like you have a lot of factors working, for and against you. I was talking to somebody at one of the big tech companies yesterday, and they're going to be doing a massive amount of layoffs really, really soon. You'll see it. I'm not going to name which one. You'll find out. That means a lot of very qualified people are already on the street, on top of all the other layoffs they just did. That and other companies, right? So if you're a junior in this market competing against that and AI, I don't know what you do. This is a good question. So I think it's going to redefine the notion and of what a junior is and what this looks like. What does it mean to start your career off? Right, I got 2 kids who are thinking about this a lot. And I don't, sadly, I don't have an answer for them. Right. And it's not because I'm a crappy parent. It's because this is just one of those inflection points that you're in. We've been in here before, but not quite to this level where you have things that can replace knowledge work to the degree it does. That's, so it's Jason brings up a good point. What's up? A thought experiment to understand if junior engineers need to be junior AI agent managers to get ahead. Well, it's interesting, actually. So one thought experiment I've been doing with respect to the broader labor force is, if we assume that agents are these things that we're just going to be using, this is the first year of agents, we're going to just go for it, and everybody has agents. If you kind of zoom out, it sort of makes you wonder what the nature of a firm is to begin with. The nature of a firm being what Robert Coase defined in his economics paper. But it's but I do see this as potentially being as impactful as what happened with the internet, where it displaced, or definitely changed the dynamics of physical, uh, uh, physically based businesses. So two things could happen. I actually think there's going to be more of a need to go back to the world of atoms, I suppose. I've been telling my kids, like, why don't you just go find a trade that you can do? Why do you? For one, it's just, I think I'm disillusioned personally with the idea of white collar work. I think a lot of it's pretty silly and doesn't really do anything. And just I think given the open disdain that employees and employers have for each other right now, it's I don't know why you'd want to go to school for that, depending on what you're doing, right?
Totally.
So yeah, I don't know what this does to juniors. I think that's the big question. But I think more broadly, what does it do to everybody else? Because it doesn't seem like anyone's really exempt from what's happening. You just get messed with in different ways. But it is discouraging. I talk to a lot of students around the world. I actually lecture at a lot of colleges and field a lot of questions, and people are asking, what can I do? So I just think that it's but if you look at what's been sold to students too, it's right. Go to college, get a job in these hot tech fields, and so forth. And I just think that it's
get college debt as well.
College debt, yeah, especially in the U.S. or tons, right? And you can't bankrupt yourself out of that, by the way. So it's, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't have an answer. What do you think?
I don't have an answer. I think one way I think about it is it's difficult to see outside the storm when you're in the eye of the storm. And I think we've been in a very complex society. I can't remember what the distinction is here, but I think we've moved to a chaotic society in many ways, where I think in a complex society, you can do tests and pressure test things and see results that then you can perhaps think in vectors from, and kind of see the future a bit better. But at the moment, it's become so chaotic that prediction is incredibly challenging. I also totally agree that the relationship between employers and employees is unsustainable. So I think generally power structures and people subject to them is unsustainable. Like, look what's happening to scientific institutional knowledge. Look what's happening to governments and relationships with governments more generally. One thing I am very interested in, as you know, and some viewers and listeners may, I went freelance full time for the first time in the past year, and it has been such a wonderful experience.
That's cool
for me. I love it so much. It's challenging, and so, like, I have an existential crisis once a week. But I get to do so.
Don't worry, people with jobs have that too, by the way.
Well, exactly. I didn't so much when I was full time, even at early stage startups. But I think that maybe I'm cut out for being freelance in a way that other people I know may not be. I know that you're a huge proponent of everyone considering going and doing their own thing. So I'm wondering if you think there are people who are cut out for it and people who aren't. And if so, if AI can help shift a lot of people who aren't to being more capable in this type of thing.
So I'm just answering a question here.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I think that people have the option now of going off on their own, and increasingly I think it's going to be your only option is to go off on your own. And so if you figure that everyone has the same capabilities with AI right now, right? It comes down to your ability to understand how to use AI to maybe ask it better questions and so forth. So when I saw that PwC had got a massive subscription to ChatGPT for their teams, for their consultants, I was like, okay, that just showed me there's going to be no differentiation at all, other than hiring a big name firm.
Yep.
Right. You all have the same tools now. So the only thing that's going to matter at the end of the day is distribution and branding for yourself. That's it.
And data as well, I think. And I do.
If you have data that's different than others, sure, yeah.
And if you know how to integrate it into your modeling workflows as well, right? I do think your models, and so much of the conversation is model focus once again. I always rant about this, but it'll be very interesting for this conversation, I think, and I'd love your perspective on this. Even when ML was the hot thing and Kaggle and all of that, it was all about what mod are you using, XGBoost, are you using random forests or ensembling methods, as opposed to what are you doing with your data. And Andrew Ng, who you've created a course with that everyone should definitely check out. He was a big proponent, and lots of us were. But I'm mentioning him because he's such a wonderful superstar and so thoughtful. But he came out like, we've got to think more about data-centric modeling, and this was pre the big LLM ChatGPT.
2021 is when he came up with that. Yeah,
exactly right. And the idea then was have a competition, for example, where you hold the model constant and you work on the data, which is so beautiful. And then, of course, with the rise of LLMs, we've become model focused again. But I think if practitioners become more data focused, and it's nowhere near as sexy, but as you're, a huge force in data engineering and robust data engineering, I'd love your thoughts on how could PwC start thinking about the data aspects of things and integrating them into their pipelines and models?
That's a big one. It's a big one. I think it's the only thing that's going to give you a moat at the end of the day, right? Like what's the institutional data that you have that you can leverage? And this comes back to, somebody's asking, oh, do I need to learn anything these days, or in the comments here? I think more than ever is a time to learn things. It gives you such a huge competitive advantage. I mean, otherwise you just, you can not learn things, I suppose, but most people don't anyway.
My silly analogy about it being a chaotic environment or being a tornado, you literally, that's all you can do. You can learn, experiment, iterate quickly. You can't even necessarily plan for the long term. And one example, one way to think about who you hire for certain things. At early stage startups, we say you want to hire explorers, right? Who will go like bush bash, jump in the river, camp for 3 hours, build a fire, kill a kangaroo, put it on whatever it is, right? And figure out the lay of the land. Then, as you start to scale, once you've got a few things figured out, you want villagers or builders to come and be a bit sedentary, start building things, and be chill. And they've actually got specific tasks that each of them are good at, and they do these things, right? I think that's no longer the case anymore. Like a lot of like Series B, Series C startups now. And Alan Nickel, he's the one who he's in the chat. I spoke about this analogy with for the first time some years ago. But startups now, even Series B, Series C, where you'd think you'd need a lot of people to build and be sedentary, you actually need far more explorers, and people who are learning all the time. And there's an argument that all of us now should be spending 40% of our time doing R&D of what's possible right now, and then building MVPs, things that work, iterating on them.
And that's where vibe coding is great. That's where vibe coding is awesome. But you have to have a sense of creativity too. I mean, that's what I think is missing in this industry entirely, which is like probably one of the reasons we're having the conversation. Is just there's I think finally, if you go back to John Maynard Keynes's argument that people would be working a 15-hour work week because he envisioned a world where computers and machines are going to do everything for people. That was back in the 30s, I believe, when he said that. It's been about 100 years. But it's investing in yourself, I think, is still the greatest thing you could be doing. I mean, looking through the comments here, somebody's asking if they're going to, data engineering is going to be replaced. I don't think so. I'm writing a book on data modeling right now. Why would I be writing a book, first of all, if learning goes away, on data modeling, which is like the most unsexy topic in the world, right? Because I think this data modeling is one of the things where you mentioned data as a moat, perhaps, at least you're kind of indicating that. But by most accounts, data is an absolute horror show in most companies. It's just true. Data quality is a big problem, and it's becoming a very big problem that companies are investing money into, precisely because of AI. Data quality in governance and management used to be a very unsexy thing until AI. Now all of a sudden, everybody knows is getting a lot of attention in this. At the same time, so that's modeling, right? I'm writing a book because I think I want to write books where, again, we help fill the knowledge gap. Of course, it's going to be harder. People aren't going to want to put in the time, but I think if you have the capability of learning, and if you're interested and you're curious, like you can imagine, you're going to be that much farther ahead than everybody. If you're the kind of person who's an explorer, who's curious, who's creative, is going out there building stuff, and you're using AI, versus a person who just doesn't think at all and just relies on AI. Who do you think is going to win? To me, it's not even a question. Like I don't even know why it would be up for debate. But I see this once in a while. People are like, well, we can just stop learning, stop thinking. AI just does everything. I'm like, you can do that. Go for it. I encourage you to do that. That just means one less person I got to compete with in this world, and one less person my kids have to. Just go for it.
And once again, it's about what we're encouraging people to do. So I do think generationally, I mean, like your kids and their generation, everyone should be incentivized to be curious, not to get 90%, to get a high GPA. Everyone should, we are beaten down as we grow up to, meet these goals, which don't incentivize learning and curiosity. They may incentivize rote learning, but they incentivize performance, not curiosity. So that I think there will hopefully be a huge shift there as well. I am interested in thinking about data quality. It becomes far more challenging when we're working with AI systems, but do you think AI can help us with data quality as well?
I think if it knows what to look for, right? So it's interesting. I just on my every afternoon I bike for about 30 minutes to 60 minutes on my have a spin bike that I just read on. I was reading this paper on data smells. So you've heard of code smells, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So this is the same thing with data. But the paper looked at, I think it was published in 2022, but it looked at the impacts of bad data on AI models, right? And it kind of goes through the categorization, and it's true. I think that data more than ever is going to be one of those things where we have to understand what it looks like, and I think AI could certainly help. I mean, I've been working on some stuff with AI and data modeling, and I think there's some potential there for simple stuff. For complex stuff, forget about it right now. The models are not in a state where they can handle any sort of enterprise complexity. They're just not. Anyone who tells you differently is like just full of shit. Or they're trying to sell you a subscription to something. So, but yeah, I think that it certainly can. Where I'm also seeing some good moves is in data and systems migrations, right? Where if you had to migrate, thousands or tens of thousands of kind of legacy jobs to a new programming language or new framework, it's like why not try and leverage LLMs and AI as much as possible? You should, but you got to know what you're looking for. That's just it. It all comes back to like, do you know what you're doing with these tools? It's kind of like if Elon Musk is out wielding a chainsaw a few weeks ago on stage, right? I grew up using a chainsaw. I know how to use them. If I gave you a chainsaw and you decided to go vibe chainsawing, like you'd probably lose your leg in about 10 seconds, right? And I think it's the same thing. You have a very powerful tool, but you got to know how to use it. Just like if using it for writing, like if you didn't know what good writing looks like and using LLM to do it, like, you can just go on LinkedIn and look at most posts these days and see what that looks like. So
Totally.
It's just, at the end of the day, it's just my whole thing with vibe coding and the whole pushback was there was this notion that you can just substitute critical thinking and knowledge and skills with just blindly accepting whatever AI gives you, and I think that's a catastrophic mistake. But like I said, the blast radius has got to be pretty small. If you want to go for that, go for it. Just understand the game you're playing. I ain't gonna stop you. I just might call you stupid. That's all. But you probably won't care about that either. So,
well, as Mr. Me 77 has written in the chat, imagine doing vibe surgery. I definitely wouldn't want a surgeon. With vibe surgery meets vibe chainsawing together. How about that?
Exactly. That's actually a good image, right?
That's what it would be like.
Well, vibe surgery is an interesting one, right? I mean, can you imagine? Because anyone on the street just do surgery. Go for it, right?
But on the other side, I don't know really what I'm talking about, but my understanding is that surgery is kind of vibe surgery in a certain sense, right? That these surgeons have internalize their processes and muscle memory so much that they are in a flow state where they're not actively rationally going, okay, now I'm going to do this now all the time. There's a deep learned intuition behind it. So it's a different type of vibes, but it is a deeply intuitive process as well.
I have a relative who's a brain surgeon. You know how hard that is? But this person's been doing it for a long time, and it's just second nature, like you say. It's like, okay, I'm going to go pick your brain apart right now. Not a big deal. But yeah, it just comes through practice. Like anything, right? Like you vibe, ML modeling or whatever, right? Like what you would do, like you have a sixth sense about how this stuff works.
Yep.
And also, if you were to use AI for this stuff, you would know almost immediately, like, does this make sense or not, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you're a master at this.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you can see what the slop is immediately. Yeah. I do like the chainsaw. Reminded me of the car analogy earlier, and. I am interested in how we can build AI tools and infrastructure put guardrails around certain things so people don't necessarily need to know as much. So one example is when cars first came out, you needed to only specialists, only mechanics could actually drive at the start, right? Because you needed to know how to fix everything, how to improve everything, failure modes, internal combustion stuff. Then we have the emergence of stick vehicles, right? And you need to know a certain amount there. Then we have automatic cars where you need to know how to change your oil, put some gas in, whatever. But the skill set to do this safely and successfully has actually changed. So do you see a similar thing happening with software?
It's interesting. I do. And I actually started rereading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which was written in 1974, a good book. I read it when I was a teenager, and I actually had the original copy from when I was a kid. So rereading that, and I think there's a lot of arguments that are similar to what you described, right? The classic thing is, do I trust a mechanic to fix my bike, or do I know how to fix it? I think it just depends on your circumstances, but we do see this happening, in programming, right? I mean, even before, LMs and code gen, it was, IntelliSense. It's, which is, depending on the programming language, is probably pretty dang good. But I know some people who turned it off. They're just like, I don't need this. She gets my way. I'll never forget us hanging out with Hannes Malheisen, the guy who created DuckDB. We're having lunch, and he was just passively just coding like an extension for DuckDB. I think it was for Avro on Sublime Text, which is like very punk.
Totally.
Just like, and I don't think he uses. I know he doesn't use AI. I'm pretty sure he doesn't. But that was an example of just like somebody who's like a true expert at the system that he's building and the language, in this case C++. And it's just like this is what Mastery looks like, right? You don't need anything. But I feel like that's going to be a relic of the past for sure. Like that's like watching just a maestro or Hannes in this case just doing their thing, and it was I think that's not going to be as common anymore. I mean, it's a dying breed. It's a dying breed. If you look at, I just don't know where you're going to learn this stuff. Building a system from scratch, right, by hand, every bit of it. It's just that's cool, but yeah.
What do you think about the space of at the moment? All of these technologies and coding assistants and agent mode on Cursor or whatever, it's all single player, right? And you mentioned you were chatting with Claude about this beforehand. I was doing the same. How much fun would it be if we could chat with Claude together, have a multiplayer conversation?
That'd be dope. Would love that.
So is there in terms of us all working together with an agent that we're delegating things to, checking it together, that type of stuff, product managers, UX people, executives, you don't want to get too crowded. No middle management, because AI is removing all middle management, which essentially I like to refer to as bouncers for the executive. But yeah, is there a future where we can have multiplayer mode with these systems and,
I hope so.
and excel there?
I hope so. I mean, that'd be pretty cool. Because I'd love to collaborate on this kind of stuff. Like, I have a lot of friends like yourself, and I think it'd be awesome. I don't see any.
So much fun. You, me, and KJam riffing with an LLM agent to see what's up. That'd be so cool.
Or just everyone in this chat too. I mean, I think that'd be fun as hell. But
just imagine it embedded in YouTube right now. Whoever's watching, YouTube, whoever's watching, build this feature, or I'll build it, and then you can acquire me. That's not a bad idea, actually.
No, I think that's where it's all going. I think it's just going to be one of those things where eventually all our agents are collaborating with each other. One
of the biggest fucking issues is memory with this shit, right? Like even most of the basic LLMs at the moment do such a horrible job with memory and over-index on my most recent comment, and like actually getting them to. We should have insight in products into memory and be able to shift that ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
Look, I just want to say there are so many people in the chat saying how much your book has impacted them, man.
Oh, so, cool.
Big props.
Thank you.
I am interested. This is a slightly tangential question, but I think it's related. I'm interested in why you write books and what the question under the question is. I love books, right? But as someone who's a wonderful educator who wants to educate more, why is the book the choice as opposed to a GitHub repository with executable code and all of these things? Why work with publishers? Why want something in hard copy?
Oh man, that's a question I ask myself a lot. Like when Fundamentals of Data Engineering was published, all of a sudden I started seeing my name with the word expert next to it. Like expert data engineering. I'm like, well, I'm literally the same person I was before the book was published, right? But now that the book's published, now, I think it's just a different, what I've come to realize, a few years in is there's a certain gravitas that just comes with publishing a book, right? I think publishing a popular book, right? You can go publish a book sight unseen just using ChatGPT and Kindle Direct Publishing if you want. You can do that in like 15 minutes. But I think publishing a book that is widely read, that's hard to do, and I think that's something I'm proud of me and Matt for doing that. But to think to the broader point of why I write books and why are they useful these days, I don't know why people read books anymore. Like there's every reason not to read a book. There's every reason but people do, right? When a book is out, and the only thing I can think of is it signals that it signals a sense of encapsulation of ideas that are impossible to replicate in the ways you described on GitHub, on a YouTube course, on something else, right? I was actually just chatting with Mark Freeman about this because him and Chad Sanderson are wrapping up their book on data contracts, and it was interesting where I remember when Mark and Chad are starting their book before, actually, when they're thinking about it. I was like, you sure you want to do this when you're starting a company? You're going to be, but I think they realized it was hard work, but it also meant like they had to think about a topic on a level that you just aren't going to think about it otherwise. And I think that's the one thing where writing forces you to think just at a fundamentally different level than anything else. You've seen this.
Yeah, and I actually want to get back to that. And I had it was a profound experience for me recently with what you just said, but the idea of writing a full book as opposed to a long series of blog posts, a long series of long blog posts with accompanying code and that type of stuff, it forces you to think what this entire framework of thinking is. And I love that. But I write a lot, but as of late, I've been writing more and more with AI, and basically around conversations I have, putting transcripts in, then co-writing and that type of stuff. But what I did recently was I sat down for the first time in a long time and wrote a 3,000 word draft on the software development lifecycle for LLMs, which LLM-powered apps, and anyone wants to see that, it'll be on O'Reilly Radar next week. So that's a shameless bit of self-promotion. But
you worked hard at it. Don't feel bad about promoting it.
I did, but dude, I sat down and wrote a 3,000 word draft without any AI assistance.
It's awesome,
and it was such a beautiful and challenging experience. And it's something I used to do a lot of that was second nature to me. But in 6 months of not doing that so much, I had lost touch of that. And when you nearly feel your brain move in different ways, and that experience really did kind of push me in a way that I think it's really important. Just like we were chatting about, if you sit down and try to read a map these days and get somewhere from A to B. That's something I appreciate about certain parts of the US is you don't have cell reception. You got to go to the local gas station,
get the map,
get the local map, right? But yeah, it forces you to think, and tools that force us to think, well, they automate the boring stuff. I mean, the amount of one of the biggest problems of schooling, I think, is the amount of long division you have to do at elementary school, and then at college, the amount of matrix factorization and Jordan canonical form bullshit. I mean, do it once or twice, but we've got tools that do that. We've got calculators now. And it's a paradigm of the rote learning where you don't learn anything. You're just implementing a fucking recipe over and over again, right?
But there's something to be said for that. And writing in general, whether you're writing an article or a book, I just don't think there's any substitute for it. And I don't think there will be a substitute because you're using language to express ideas, and you're using ideas to express language, and that's just, it literally is thinking. This book I'm working on right now, it should have been out a long time ago, but I've been thinking really hard about it, and I want it to be really, really good. I could just have an LLM just generate everything for me, but I'm not going to cheat myself out of the experience of thinking about this topic and writing about it. I'm not going to cheat the audience and the readers out of that, right? And so the books, I started a publishing company too, and the books I'm publishing are the books I feel that are going to help change the thinking of the industry and push us forward. That doesn't go away, right? New ideas are the things that help promote us and push us. If we lose that, what do we have, right? So that's the kind of books I want to write. I'm not interested in publishing books that are, how to do X, Y, or Z in Python, for example. That to me actually is a good use for LLMs at this point. Like you have a question, it'll probably do a good enough job helping you. Right. And so I don't think that those need to be books these days. In fact, I haven't felt like those need to be books for ages. Those should be courses on YouTube or now just prompts. But the idea is like, like my friend Jim Actigani came up with the idea of data mesh, right? Revolutionary idea, took the world by storm. The LLM wouldn't come up with that, right? It just wouldn't. And so these are the types of books I'm interested in really helping people bring to life, or the books that are really going to push our industry forward. Because more than ever, we need that type of thinking. We otherwise become stagnant. So,
and to that point, I do think I do a lot of education as well for data science and ML and AI stuff. And until LLMs, sadly, when I teach, a lot of it, I have been needing to teach people APIs, right? And I don't want to teach APIs. I want to teach systems thinking and building systems, right, that incorporate data and the entropy of the real world into them. And now as an educator, I'm liberated, Joe, to teach the things that really keep me up at night and keep me excited and get me out of bed in the morning. They keep me up at night and get me out of bed in the morning. So
yeah,
God knows when I sleep, which I don't really at the moment. We are going to have to wrap up in a second, sadly, but I'm wondering, as an active prediction, let's fast forward 1, 2, 5 years, whatever it is, whatever you're comfortable with, and tell me the future that you don't want to see and the future you do want to see with respect to how people build software and who gets to build software.
To say 5 years from now, you don't even want to know my prediction of what I think the world looks like. But as far as software goes, assuming we haven't completely blown each other away in 5 years, I think we're just gonna have I don't know. I don't know what happens. I think things are moving too fast. But what I can see is, if I look at what doesn't go away, right? If I look at least what doesn't go away today, the need for robust systems, the need for systems that work, the need for systems that are low in technical debt as much as they can be, the systems where data is of high quality, and systems where AI is helping the business. Like, I don't see that world going away. And so as long as that world exists, I think that we're going to do everything we can to build things that complement that future. Right. So that's the only, so when you ask me for predictions, the only thing I can look at is like, well, what's probably not going to change as much. Right. If I try and extrapolate and say, well, 2025 will be the year of, this type of a model or whatever, it's like, nobody can say that. Right. Yep. So, but again, commercial needs, assuming, they're still the same. And, I think that's where we'll still be going as an industry, because that's what we've been doing as an industry for many decades. But as Frederick Brooks said, in one of his articles I think it was the 70s, that there's no silver bullet, right? So we're always trying to look for the silver bullet in our industry that's just going to magically solve all of our problems, and I don't think we found it yet. I don't think that AI is that bullet either. At the end of the day,
it's not fair on AI or us to even think it's a silver bullet, right?
No, but it's being sold as that, right? So the other thing I don't think is going to change is like, vendors are going to vendor. They're going to try and push stuff that is a silver bullet because that's what they're incentivized to do. That's, I'm not going to blame them. That's the game. So
that's a really important point, because at least when I kind of came up in a decade ago, or let's say starting in 2011 or so, in like data science and ML and AI stuff, the tools that we were all using were kind of the extended PyData and SciPy stack, right? So we had the genesis of IPython notebooks had just been folded into, and IPython terminal had been folded into Project Jupyter. We had Matplotlib. We had Wes McKinney not only created pandas, but PD read CSV. We could all import CSVs into our Python environments in notebooks, scikit-learn, all of these things. So it was a really like vibrant community of open source tools that we're all using.
Yeah.
It still was kind of fragmented and fractured. The R community, of course, had all of their stuff going on, which was less fractured and fragmented. But now, with like the venture-backed fucking tragedy of the commons that we're seeing in the tooling landscape, where every marketing page looks the same, and to even figure out what a tool is, I need to get on a call with a BDR who, then messages me afterwards. It is how can we even step back? I mean, somebody made a point that we haven't really evolved to use all these tools. I don't think our civilization has evolved to deal with all of these sales calls I have to get on.
The counter argument to what I just said, where we need to increase our skills to leverage the tools we have. I actually think that one scenario of the future is it's aligned with what Satya Nadella was talking about, where the application landscape gets inverted and the tool landscape gets inverted, where you just invent, use AI to create the solution for you, and it's very bespoke, right? And so that is another possibility. I don't discount things, by the way. You'll never see me say, well, that's absolutely never going to happen. Like, it could happen, actually. And I think that there's a rational use, like you said with the JSON viewer, right? You build a tool, and maybe that's it. And like I said, it's sort of, the 3D printed comment, earlier on in our discussion earlier, but this could be the case where you just invent tools as you need them. And, then the AI agents, the companies become a toll road for different agents and models. That's absolutely a situation that could happen. And I would kind of like that, actually, because I know the kind of tools that I want, and they're sometimes not the tools. Like, I subscribe to a tool like Notion, right? Notion's a great tool for a lot of things. Do I need everything that it provides?
Disagree.
No. You don't like it? Okay.
No, actually, I do love, but just the amount I had to learn about, like, setting up a database to build a basic Kanban board where I can switch rows, like, bent my brain.
It's insane. Yeah, I do agree with that. Like,
it's incredibly powerful. But
it can do anything you want, but as you point out, it's a learning curve, right? But if I just need like a certain thing and I just want to build that, cool, make it easy for me, right? And so they have AI Notion, which works 20% of the time. But the whole point is, like, if I could just have an agent, I can just tell, I just need this thing, build it for me. I don't need to pay a subscription to anybody. I just want this functionality for this use. That's awesome, right? And so, and it made me think about this article I was reading on the flight home last week, where it was talking about just the gap in robotic expertise between China and the rest of the world. Like, they're building general purpose robots. So if you think of AGI, but the robotic version of it, this is what that is. Wild. It's like robots that can just do anything. And then they have factories that robots just make other robots. And there's no humans working in these factories anymore. They're just all robot powered with the lights off. Like, this is a world we're heading into. But if I think about that, where I have a robot that can just make anything I want and do anything I want, okay, that's pretty powerful. And that completely inverts the entire manufacturing paradigm of today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Totally wild.
So this is where I'm like, this is the other alternative where I'm like, okay, knowledge is great. Plus this stuff, my God, it's a cool universe. It's frightening. It's awesome. It's everything in between. So,
without a doubt. And one thing I'm hearing there is that maybe we just have less centralization as well, which I'm a big fan of.
I'm a big fan of that too.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, yeah, you mentioned KJAM. I mean, I think we're all kind of like somewhat anarchist in some way. So, yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. I don't like centralization.
Yeah. I also am interested. I mean, there are 8.2 billion people on Earth or something like that. And we've got 28 million developers, supposedly. And that's, slowly increasing, but kind of plateauing. I'm just interested if this type of tooling can how it increases the surface area of who not necessarily can create robust software, but who can contribute to it.
I think, again, if there's guardrails on things, somebody described it. I can't remember the article. I need to find it. It was a really good article, but it just talked about the amount of technical debt in the world, and technical debt meaning the software that's yet to be written, right? And that's a lot. Yeah. We are constrained by the 70-something million developers, right? But if we can increase the amount of code and things that software can solve, I mean, it goes back to David Deutsch's writings, and so forth. But this is where you start getting into the realm of like science fiction, but I think this is potentially the world we're getting into. And this comes back to the notion, though, of craftsmanship, right? Because this is the essence of what I was talking about earlier with you and in my talk a couple weeks ago in Austria. But it's like, if we can build things that are robust and not disposable, right, and things that work and serve a real purpose, along with AI, this is to the benefit of all of humanity. If we live in this disposable culture where we just have endless systems producing endless amounts of garbage, it doesn't serve anybody, right? And then you have, it makes the Pacific garbage patch look downright quaint.
Yeah.
But this is a world, that I think we're at a juncture to make that decision right now. Well, I don't know that we collectively won't make a decision. It'll just be the consequence of a bunch of decisions. But right now I'm not hopeful. But there will be a lot of software produced. I don't think that's up for debate. There's going to be a lot of code, a lot of software produced.
It's going to be a Cambrian explosion, Joe. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I love that you mentioned we're verging on science fiction as well, because this kind of takes us back to the start of the conversation where you talked about coming up in the 80s. I came up in the 90s, so I was more like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Wu-Tang Clan and Nirvana. But I like the sci-fi of the 80s. I'm thinking like Neuromancer, man. I mean, like this type of stuff, Gibson, and then a bit later, Snow Crash, Neil Stephenson. Like you look at this science fiction and how it relates to the world we live in today, and it's no joke, right?
No, it's no joke at all. I mean, I have the original books on my bookshelf. These are the books I grew up on, and it's interesting now seeing a lot of the stuff becoming reality, and in some ways those books are almost quaint in some ways.
This is super weird. So in Snow Crash, like the virtual reality place, as you know, is called, and for people who don't, it's called the Metaverse, and it's literally in Snow Crash a place which was meant to be a free place, virtual reality, anybody could do anything, that's taken over by corporate interests. That's literally what happens in the novel, and it's called the Metaverse. And I couldn't figure out when Zuck rebranded as the Metaverse whether he like knew that or
oh, he knew it. Yeah, I think it's but it's a really good what hero protagonist I think was the hero of the book there. But yeah, but that was an interesting one, right? Where you had he was living in a storage locker, I think, in the middle of out at the outskirts of LA.
Exactly.
Yeah, and had to go fight some criminals.
Yeah, and it actually the novel opens with like a high-speed chase by a pizza delivery driver being chased by the people who own the company that is essentially the Uber Eats of whatever it is, and they're going to shoot him if he doesn't get it there on time or something like that.
Yeah, if you don't hit the 30-minute delivery, you're dead.
Exactly. Look, so that's not the future we're imagining. Hopefully, it isn't the future.
Somebody else imagined it for us. We don't need to do it. So
exactly. But Joe, thank you for your time and wisdom, and I always enjoy conversations with you. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining. We've had over 100 people here collectively throughout the chat, and we'll put out the podcast next week. So keep your eyes open for it. You probably know, but follow Joe Reis on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else, people? You've got a Substack newsletter.
I got a couple Substacks. I got a podcast. Not an OnlyFans yet. Just kidding. But who knows?
You mean you do have an OnlyFans?
Nah, no, I don't.
Weirdly, like
not that you know of.
Well, Data After Dark with Joe Reis. When you mentioned like you can write Python code drunk, I've always wanted to do it like like drunk history, but with like a conversation like this where we just, or like a hot one. Is it hot ones? The ones where they eat hot
hot wings, yeah.
Whatever. It'd be fun to do a podcast like that or a drunk history one sometime, I feel.
That'd be fun. Only bits. Yeah. Nice one, Travis, like that.
No.
Well,
only bites.
It's yeah, but I'd be down to do that. Maybe in person we can get some mics and stuff like that. But yeah, drunk podcasting is pretty fun. So
that'll be fun. So I'll be in the US for most of summer, and I'll be in Europe before that as well. So
hit me up.
Yeah, I also want to get you and we've mentioned KJam. So this is Catherine Jarmul, close friend of both myself and Joe. Check her out. Does a lot of incredible work on privacy, data privacy, security, all of these types of things. Joe, thanks once again.
Of course, man.
So much fun. Thank you all for joining, and check out the podcast when it comes out next week.
Okay. All right. See y'all.
And scene, dude.
So that was
so much fun.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, of course. Make sure I'm uploaded here.